The wild Mustang was agonizing with a tire stuck around its neck for 2 years. Robert accelerated his pickup truck, intending to drive past. It wasn't his problem, until he saw the old faded sign, St. Vincent Creek Ranch. A chill ran down his spine. What happened next, no one expected. Before we dive into this story of redemption, tell us where you're watching from and hit like if you believe it's never too late for a second chance. Ready? Let's go. Robert Miller had no patience for weakness. At 58, the agribusiness mogul had built a $2 billion empire by stepping on anyone necessary. That Tuesday morning, his secretary quietly wept as she organized the mass layoffs at the Kansas branch. 40 families out of a job before Christmas. Robert continued signing papers without looking up, the click of the computer keys drowning out her sobs. When he finished, he pushed the folder towards the woman. "Finalize these today and stop crying in my office." Helen picked up the documents with trembling hands. 20 years working for him, and she'd never seen him show an ounce of remorse. Robert returned to his laptop, calculating how much he'd save with the cuts. Feelings didn't pay bills. Compassion didn't multiply fortunes. He'd learned that the hard way, and ever since, he'd armored his heart like a steel vault. His solitary life in his penthouse mirrored his philosophy. Relationships were temporary contracts. Friendships were strategic alliances. And family, well, family was a luxury that had cost too much. At 58, Robert Miller was feared, respected, and utterly alone. Exactly as he'd planned. The phone rang, a problem with the inspection of new lands in Montana. Another 125,000 acres he'd bought to subdivide and resell. Estimated profit, $200 million in 5 years. He grabbed the keys to his Ford F-150 and left to handle it personally. On the way, he avoided looking at the photo in the frame he'd kept in his drawer years ago. Some wounds were best left to heal in peace. The dirt road snaked through the arid plains. Robert drove on autopilot, his mind already calculating investments, when a strange noise made him brake sharply. A low, almost human groan came from the bushes to the right. He got out of his pickup, annoyed. Probably some injured steer from a neighboring ranch. What he found left him paralyzed. A young wild Mustang, with a bay coat and a white star-shaped blaze on its forehead, was tangled in thorny bushes. But that wasn't what was shocking. Around the animal's neck, a truck tire was lodged like a deadly collar. The rubber had cut deep into the skin, creating festering wounds that attracted flies. The horse could barely lower its head to drink or eat. Its flanks showed protruding ribs. It had been slowly dying for months. Robert made a move to get back in his truck. Wild animals died in nature. It wasn't his responsibility. He took 2 steps, then stopped. The Mustang lifted its head with effort and stared at him. In those brown eyes, Robert saw something that deeply unsettled him, a silent resignation he knew all too well. "Damn it," he muttered, returning to his pickup to get tools. He wasn't doing this out of compassion. Mustangs were worth money in the right market, and having a dead animal rotting on his new land could attract buzzards and harm future sales. Pure business logic. It took him 2 hours to cut branches and free the animal from the thorns, ruining a $100 shirt in the process. The Mustang didn't react aggressively. It was too weak to fight. When he finally got close to the tire, Robert realized he'd need specialized equipment. The rim was so deeply embedded that any sudden movement could break the horse's neck. He looked around and saw the faded wooden sign, half hidden by vegetation. St. Vincent Creek Ranch, Esther, 1987. St. Vincent. That name hit Robert like a punch to the gut. His hands trembled imperceptibly as he stared at the worn letters. Robert tried to focus on the immediate problem. He called 3 different veterinarians. 2 refused to respond to a call for a wild animal. The third would charge $15,000 for the operation. He accepted the price without hesitation. Money had never been an issue. While waiting for the veterinary team to arrive, he watched the Mustang from a distance. The animal was about 8 years old, he estimated, still young for a wild horse, but old enough to have suffered for years with that torture. How on earth had a tire ended up around a wild horse's neck, and why hadn't anyone done anything sooner? Dr. Henry arrived with 2 assistants and sedation equipment. An experienced man, grey beard, eyes tired from having witnessed much cruelty. "It's amazing it's still alive," he murmured, examining the wounds. "That tire has been there for at least 2 years. See how the skin has grown around the rubber, and it managed to survive." 2 years? Robert felt something churn in his stomach. At least. Wild horses live in herds. When one gets injured like this, it's usually abandoned. This one is a born survivor. As they prepared the sedation, Robert walked to the barbed wire fence that divided his new property from the neighboring land. St. Vincent. It couldn't be a coincidence. 6 miles from there was... No. He wasn't going to think about it. He'd bought this land for business, period. The operation lasted 3 hours. With the Mustang sedated, they used special saws to cut the tire without further damaging its neck. When the rubber finally broke apart and fell to the ground, Robert felt a strange relief he couldn't explain. "He'll need care for weeks," said Dr. Henry, applying antibiotics. "The wounds are deep, there's infection. In specialized sanctuaries, he'd have a better chance of recovery." "Which sanctuary is closest?" "The most reliable one is in Colorado, but they have a 6-month waiting list." Robert watched the still unconscious Mustang. A wild animal accustomed to freedom would never adapt well to captivity, even temporary. But released in these conditions, it would die in days. "How much would it cost to set up a temporary structure here?" Dr. Henry stared at him, surprised. "About $50,000 maybe. Adequate fencing, shelter, medications, regular visits. Why would you do that?" Robert didn't answer. He didn't know himself. Back in his corporate office in the capital that night, Robert tried to focus on work, but his mind constantly returned to the Mustang. On impulse, he searched St. Vincent Creek Ranch on Google. The results made him close his laptop immediately. The next day, he authorized the construction of the temporary structure. When questioned by his partners about the unnecessary expense, he replied that it was an investment in green marketing. A sustainable company was worth more in the market. A convincing lie he almost believed himself. He returned to the land 3 days later. The Mustang was on its feet, still weak, but drinking water on its own. Robert approached slowly and, without knowing why, spoke softly. "You're going to be okay. I'm going to call you Vincent." The horse turned its head towards the voice, ears alert. For a moment, Robert had the absurd feeling that the animal understood not only his words, but also the pain he had been trying to hide for 12 years. When he realized he had spent 2 hours just watching Vincent graze, Robert was startled by himself. He didn't have time for this. He had an empire to run, but for the first time in a decade, he drove slowly back to the city. Robert couldn't stop thinking about the horse. During important meetings, his mind wandered to Vincent. He found himself calling Dr. Henry daily, checking on the wound's progress. His partners started making jokes about his new passion for animals. Robert pretended to laugh, but inside something was changing. On Thursday, he decided to investigate. He drove to the regional land registry office and requested the complete history of the lands he had bought. When he saw the name of the previous owner, his hands trembled so much he almost dropped the documents. St. Vincent Creek Ranch, last owner Mary Helen Miller, deceased in 2012. His sister. Robert stumbled out of the office. 12 years. 12 years since Mary had died of cancer, alone in a rural hospital, while he closed a $50 million deal in New York City. She had called 17 times that week. He had ignored every call. After the closing, he'd thought. I'll visit her after the closing. There was no after. He parked on the side of the road and, for the first time since the funeral, let the tears flow. Mary, 5 years younger, who followed him like a shadow in childhood. Mary, who had chosen a simple life, raising horses while he chased fortunes. Mary, who had never given up trying to reconnect them, even after he had become too cold and distant to love anything. With trembling hands, he called Dr. Henry. "Doctor, I need to know, how long have wild horses been in that region?" "Decades. There's a local legend about a woman who fed the wild mustangs in the valley. They said she could get close to them without fear. Old cowboys used to say that even after she died, some mustangs kept returning to that area, as if waiting for her." Robert hung up and drove straight to Mary's abandoned ranch. The house was in ruins, but in the barn he found boxes of her belongings he'd never had the courage to go through. Among yellowed photos and letters, he found a diary. March 2011. "Robert hasn't answered my calls in 6 months. The doctor said I have a year, maybe 2. I won't tell him over the phone. When he's ready to listen, he'll come. Meanwhile, I care for the mustangs in the valley. They don't judge me for loving someone who can no longer love back." August 2011. "The treatment isn't working, but the wild horses keep coming to the fence. I brought fresh hay today. The bay stallion with the star on its forehead came closer than ever. I almost managed to touch its muzzle. Robert used to say I had a way with horses. Maybe he was right." January 2012. "I'm too weak to leave the house, but I can still see the valley from the window. The mustangs are still there. I left instructions for someone to keep bringing hay after I'm gone. Robert needs to know that I never stopped waiting for him, that I never stopped loving my brother, even though he'd forgotten how to love back." Robert let the diary fall. Vincent, the mustang with the star on its forehead that Mary had fed, who had suffered alone for 2 years on her land, waiting for care that never came because Robert had sold everything without even visiting the place. He ran to where Vincent was grazing. The horse lifted its head, scars still visible on its neck. In that moment, Robert knew he wasn't just saving an injured animal. He was trying to save the last piece of connection to the only person who had loved him unconditionally, and perhaps trying to save himself. Robert spent the night rereading every line of Mary's diary. On the last pages, he found a letter she had never sent, dated a week before her death. "Dear Robert, I know you're busy building your empire. I'm not writing to blame you for your absence. I understand that softness for people like you means weakness, but I want you to know that I continue to feed the wild mustangs in the valley every day. They remind me of when we were kids, and you used to say we'd have a ranch together when we grew up. Maybe, when you come back here someday, you'll see the horses and remember who you used to be, or maybe you'll remember that you still can be." The next morning, Helen knocked on his office door, holding an official envelope. "Robert, a proposal came in from Continental Mining Corporation. They want to buy your new lands for $300 million cash. It's triple what you paid." Robert took the document without emotion. $300 million, enough net profit to retire, but accepting would mean Mary's lands would be transformed into a bauxite mine. The valley where the mustangs had grazed for generations would become a 1,640-foot deep hole. "They want an answer by tomorrow," Helen insisted. "Robert, it's too much money to refuse." That afternoon, Robert went to visit Vincent. The horse was visibly stronger, its wounds healing well. When Robert approached the fence, Vincent walked towards him, the first time the animal had voluntarily sought human contact. "Your phone hasn't stopped ringing," said Dr. Henry, who was making his weekly visit. "Your partners are desperate to talk to you." Robert knew why. Continental Mining Corporation was an old client. His partners were sure he would accept the offer. $300 million was too much money for any sensible businessman to refuse. But for the first time in his life, Robert discovered that there were things more valuable than money. He called the president of Continental Mining Corporation personally. "I'm sorry, but the land is no longer for sale." Miller, we're talking about $300 million. I'm aware of the value. So what's the problem? You've always been pragmatic. It's just empty land. Robert looked at Vincent, who was calmly grazing near the fence. It's not empty land. It's home. His partners called an emergency meeting the same day. 5 men in expensive suits stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Robert, are you throwing away $300 million because of a horse?" exploded Maurice Stone, his partner for 15 years. "It's not because of the horse." "Then why?" Robert hesitated. How to explain that he was trying to honor the memory of a sister he had left to die alone? How to say that he finally understood that building fortunes on ashes was worth nothing? Because some things are priceless. The meeting ended with threats of partnership dissolution. Robert knew he would lose much more than the $300 million. He would lose contracts, influence, the company he had taken decades to build. But when he returned to the valley and saw Vincent drinking clean water for the first time in years, Robert knew he had made the right choice. For the first time since he was 8 years old, when he had promised Mary they would be siblings forever, Robert Miller had put love above profit. The consequences would come, but he was ready to face them. The dissolution of the partnership cost Robert $400 million in assets and contracts. Former partners filed 3 lawsuits. The financial press speculated about a possible midlife crisis or nervous breakdown of the agribusiness mogul. Robert ignored it all. For the first time in decades, he woke up without the crushing weight of ambition in his chest. He sold his penthouse and moved to a simple house near Mary's land. Every day he visited Vincent, who now allowed Robert to approach and even touch his muzzle occasionally. 3 months after refusing the mining company's offer, Robert made a decision that surprised even himself. He used part of his remaining fortune to buy neighboring ranches in liquidation, creating a 37,000-acre sanctuary for wild horses. He named the project the Mary Helen Sanctuary, but the real transformation wasn't in the land, it was in him. One morning, Robert found an envelope under his door. Inside, a letter in a shaky hand. "Mr. Miller, my name is Charles Green. You laid me off 6 months ago, along with 39 other people from the Kansas branch. My daughter has leukemia, and we lost our health insurance. I heard about your sanctuary and came personally to ask for work. I know how to care for horses. My father was a cowboy. Please give me a chance. I just need an opportunity to start over." Robert vaguely remembered the man, one of the anonymous faces in the mass layoffs of December. Back then, Charles was just a number on a layoff spreadsheet. Now, Robert saw a desperate father fighting for his daughter. He drove to the simple house on the outskirts of Wichita, Kansas, where Charles lived with his family. He knocked on the door with an envelope in his hand. "Charles?" The man opened the door and paled upon recognizing him. "Mr. Miller, I came to bring this." Robert extended the envelope. "Inside is the deed to an apartment downtown, in your name, paid in full, and a medical fund with $500,000 for your daughter's treatment." Charles stood paralyzed, unable to process what he was hearing. "It's not charity," Robert continued. "It's a debt. I owe you much more than this. All of you." In the following months, Robert sought out each of the 40 families he had laid off. He couldn't repair everything. Some damages were irreversible. But he returned homes, paid off debts, funded medical treatments. Some people received him with tears of gratitude. Others slammed the door in his face. Robert accepted both reactions. The sanctuary began to attract Mustangs from all over the plains. Vincent, now fully recovered, became the leader of a small herd. Robert watched from afar, learning that to love something meant to set it free. One afternoon, while watching the horses run free through the valley, Robert spoke to himself. "Mary, it took me 12 years to understand what you tried to teach me, that being truly rich has nothing to do with money in the bank. It has to do with how many lives you positively touch before you leave." The wind rustled the tall grass, and Robert was certain that, from somewhere, Mary was smiling. At 59, Robert Miller had finally learned the difference between having success and having meaning. And it all began with a wild horse that refused to give up, even when the whole world abandoned it. 2 years had passed. Robert, now 60, watched Vincent, who had turned 10, leading a herd of 15 Mustangs through the valley. The sanctuary had become a national benchmark in wild horse preservation, but Robert rarely spoke about it publicly. He preferred the silence of contemplation to the noise of fame. The project had grown beyond his expectations. Veterinarians and biologists from universities came to study the horse's behavior in semi-captivity. Children from rural schools regularly visited to learn about preservation. Robert funded everything discreetly, refusing interviews or public recognition. One morning he found Vincent standing by the fence, contemplating the horizon with an unusual stillness. The horse was visibly slower, its movements less agile. Robert called Dr. Henry. "It's natural," the veterinarian explained after examining him. "Vincent is entering old age for a wild horse. In the wild, he might have another 6 or 7 years ahead. Here, with care, he might live a little longer." For the first time, Robert confronted mortality, not just Vincent's, but his own. At 60 statistically, he had about 15 years left. Enough time for what? What would he leave behind when he was gone? That night, he revisited Mary's diary for the 100th time. On the back cover, he found a note he had never noticed. "If Robert ever reads this, in the shoebox under my bed, there's something I've kept my whole life, waiting for the right moment to give to him. Perhaps this is that moment." Robert ran to Mary's abandoned house. In her bedroom, he found the box exactly where she had said. Inside, a faded photo of the 2 children riding a sorrel horse, smiling at the camera. On the back, Mary's childish handwriting, "Robert and I, we're going to have a ranch together when we grow up. Siblings promise, 1972. Beneath the photo, a sealed letter with his name on it. Trembling, Robert opened it. "My dearest brother, if you are reading this, it means you have finally come home. No matter how many years have passed or how much distance we created between us, you always were and always will be my brother at heart. I know life taught you to be hard, but I hope you find a way to be gentle again. The world needs your kindness, Robert. And I always believed that deep down it was still there, waiting for a reason to resurface. Take care of the Mustangs for me. They never gave up believing in love, even when the world was cruel, just as I never gave up believing in you." Robert knelt on the floor of the empty room and cried until he had no more tears. For Mary, for Vincent, for all the years lost in pursuit of riches that couldn't fill the void in his chest. The next day, he established the Mary Helen Miller Institute, dedicating 80% of his remaining fortune to the preservation of wild horses nationwide. Not because he wanted recognition, but because he finally understood that legacy wasn't what you accumulated, it was what you allowed to grow after you were gone. Vincent grazed nearby, and Robert whispered a promise to the wind. "I'll take care of them, Mary, all of them, until my last day." On the 3rd anniversary of Mary's death, 15 years after her passing, Robert organized a simple ceremony at the sanctuary. Not a celebration of death, but of the life she had chosen to live. Veterinarians, sanctuary staff, and families Robert had helped rebuild their lives came. Vincent, now 12 years old and visibly grayer around his muzzle, remained close throughout the ceremony, as if understanding the moment's importance. His herd grazed peacefully in the valley. 15 free horses that would never know the weight of a saddle or the pain of abandonment. Charles Green, who now managed the sanctuary, approached Robert with news. His daughter, whose leukemia treatment Robert had funded, had been completely cured 2 years ago, and had just graduated as a veterinarian. She wanted to work at the sanctuary. "It's the circle closing," Charles murmured, watching the horses. Robert nodded in agreement. At 62, he finally understood that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about honoring it by doing things differently in the present. As dusk fell, when everyone had left, Robert walked alone to the fence where he had first found Vincent. The spot now had a small sign. Here a second chance began. It didn't mention names. Robert had always preferred anonymity to ostentation. Vincent approached slowly, as he always did in moments of quiet. Robert extended his hand and touched the horse's muzzle, feeling its warm breath against his palm. "You saved me, you know," he whispered. "The day I found you, I was dead inside, rich, powerful, but completely dead. Mary knew you would be here when I was ready." The horse remained still, ears alert, as if listening to every word. Robert felt the weight of the years, not as a burden, but as a collection of lessons learned. The fortune that remained, the projects he had created, the lives he had touched, none of it would matter if he hadn't learned to love again. And it all began with a wild horse that refused to give up. "When my time comes," he continued, watching the valley gilded by the setting sun, "I want them to know that Robert Miller learned the difference between winning in life and truly living, and that it's never too late to choose love over fear." A gentle breeze rustled the tall grass. On the distant hills, other wild mustangs ran free, descendants of generations Mary had fed, protected, and loved unconditionally. Robert walked back home, knowing that when his time came to leave, he wouldn't die as he had lived for 50 years, alone and empty. He would die knowing he had left the world a little better than he found it, and that some loves, even those that come late, even those disguised as responsibility or guilt, are powerful enough to transform a heart of stone into fertile ground where beautiful things can finally grow. Vincent neighed softly in the distance, and Robert smiled. Some promises take a lifetime to fulfill, but when they are, they're worth every tear, every lost year, every chance we almost let slip away. The St. Vincent Creek Ranch was full of life again, and Robert Miller, finally, was home. This story is about regret, about words we didn't say, calls we didn't make, people we left behind while chasing things that don't matter. If you have someone you love, but are distant from out of pride, out of anger because you're too busy, don't wait to need a wild horse to teach you what truly matters. Call, write, show up, because unlike Robert, you still have time. And if this story reminded you of someone, or if you believe in second chances, share it. We never know who needs to hear this today. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.